I'd encourage you, please, to get a Bible out, or you can use a Bible on the internet, or just as long as you can see this passage before you, that would be great. That's John chapter 2. And it's Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding at Cana in Galilee. And this is probably one of the most well-known parts of the Bible. And it's probably one of the most well-loved as well. And I really love this story. But as I sat down recently to read through it again, my heart sank a little because I couldn't help but wonder that perhaps this is not the most sensitively chosen story for where we all are right now. Because right now, on the 17th of January 2021 in London, this story isn't really what we need to hear. It kind of adds insult to injury in a number of ways. For one thing, it's a story about abundance, abundant wine from nowhere. And right now, in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, in lockdown 3, life is not characterized by abundance for most of us. It's characterized by lack of physical connection with other people, lack of space, lack of time, lack of energy, especially if you're one of the people who's having to homeschool your children at the moment, lack of financial security perhaps for many of us. This is a story about abundance, but we're living in a time of lack. And what's more, this is a story about a miracle. But right now, we are longing for a miracle, and it doesn't seem to be happening. We desperately want this virus to just disappear. We want our lives to just be back to normal, and it's not happening. So God, what's going on? You could do a miracle back then. Can't you do one for us now? And then, of course, this is also a story about a massive wedding and wedding party. Loads of people just getting together and having a great time. But right now, we can't have weddings or wedding parties of any size or description. And that has been extremely painful for many of us. So all in all, I sat down to prepare this talk, read through this passage, and I thought, oh no, what have I done? I've picked the least appropriate Bible passage possible. And you may be sitting at home thinking, yeah, you have, Luke. But hear me out just for a moment. Because one important detail about this passage is that it's not just a story, it's a sign. It's a sign or a signal. That's the word that John's Gospel uses. In verse 11, take a look at it. It says, this was the first of Jesus' signs. And over the coming weeks, we'll be looking at all 7 of Jesus' signs that appear in John's Gospel. Now, don't get me wrong, the miracle at Cana, it happened. It was something that took place in time and history. It was real, but it was also a sign. It was something that pointed away from itself towards something else. Which means we're not meant to stay there at the sign, commenting on it, or saying whether we like it or not, or whether it's for us right now or not. I was in a car with a friend once, driving along with the sat-nav on, and he just turned it off because he said he didn't like her tone of voice. And he kind of missed the point of what the sat-nav's there for. He missed the point of what a sign is. That's not how signs work. Signs are there to be followed. And if we decide to step away from this sign, this first of Jesus' signs in John, his transforming water into wine, if we decide to step away from that, then similarly we'll probably go wrong. We'll likely make a wrong turning. So today, let's not get hung up on the sign. We're just going to follow it, okay? Because when we do follow these signs, that's when the journey with God can begin. That's when God can start doing some work on us. And this particular sign, it points to so many profound and liberating things about the God who Jesus reveals to us. It points to God's delight and concern for our own personal lives and loves, which is shown by his choice to go along to this wedding, to be present at this wedding. It shows God's abundance and his lavish character towards people. It points to God's call to us to move from the mere outward rituals of wellness and presentability, as symbolized by those big water jugs for ritual washing, and instead to a transformation of inward joy, symbolized by the wine. And perhaps most importantly, this is a sign in the abundant wine that points towards what's going to happen to Jesus later on in John. Jesus will become the gift of God's very self for us. Jesus will become God pouring out his own heart's blood for us once for all on the cross. In other words, there's a lot of good stuff going on with this sign. Like the wine itself, the sign seems to be abundant. It seems to point to so many ways that the God who was in Jesus is just sheerly wonderful. It's a theologian's field day, and there's so much that could be said, that could be discovered about God when you just start following this sign. But perhaps the simplest thing that this sign signals is this. I want to read some words from Pope Francis. Pope Francis says, "In the miracle at Cana, we can see an act of kindness by Jesus towards the newlyweds." I'll read that again. In the miracle at Cana, we can see an act of kindness by Jesus towards the newlyweds. I almost fell off my seat when I read that for the first time. Such a simple and arresting observation. In the miracle at Cana, we can see an act of kindness by Jesus towards the newlyweds. Because I'd never even thought about the newlyweds in this story. They're not named, they don't speak, they weren't close acquaintances of Jesus. But of course they are there, and of course this miracle was for them. And at its simplest, it just signals the kindness of God. The newlywed couple didn't need it, they didn't ask for it, perhaps they didn't particularly want it, but Jesus gave it. Gallons and gallons of really delicious wine. And this is where I feel Jesus' sign is pointing us today, towards God's unrequested, uninvited, and unnecessary kindness towards people. Whether newlywed Jews in Galilee under the Roman Empire, or mums, dads, professionals, retirees, school children, clergy people in and around Balham today under a global pandemic. God is kind to people. That's what this sign signals. And just John's gospel is elsewhere very clear that the same Jesus who we're looking at now, this Jesus who walked and talked and died and rose again in Judea 2,000 years ago, is alive and present by his Holy Spirit amongst his followers now. We live in him and he lives in us, and we, you and me, are one in him today. So according to John, we can actually look at Jesus at this wedding in Cana, observe his character, observe his action, and expect to see and experience that same character and action today in and around our daily lives. We can expect to see signs that cohere with or point in the same direction as the signs that Jesus gave in his earthly life and ministry. And we see from this sign that it is the character of God in Jesus to be unnecessarily kind. Water into wine kind. And it is that same Jesus who is alive with us at every moment now. So today I would like to encourage you to follow the signs of God's kindness. That's going to be my little catchphrase for the day. So if you remember one thing about this talk, you can remember that bit. Follow the signs of God's kindness. That's what's going to lead us through this pandemic landscape, through the loneliness, through the exhaustion, the worry, the sickness, the grief, following the signs of God's kindness. There is a map to help you pick your way through life right now. Last week, Marcus was challenging each of us to discern what God's vision for us is, individually and as a community. What is God's vision for you? What are the next steps, big or small, that God is drawing you towards in 2021? And if you're not sure what God's next steps are for you, today I want to encourage you that there is a map. There is already a map full of signs of God's kindness laid out before you. You just have to take a moment to step back and read the map and spot those signs and choose to follow them. And what do they look like? How do you know that you're not following the wrong sign? Or how do you know that the sign is true and reliable? Well, let's look at the passage that we've just read. The passage tells us at least three things, I think, about what signs of God's kindness are like. They may well taste good. They will probably sit outside of our agendas. And they will likely build our trust. So let's have a closer look at those three. Signs of God's kindness taste good, they sit outside of your agenda, and they build your trust. Number one, what you're looking at may be a sign of God's kindness if it tastes good. What do I mean by that? Well, bear with me for a moment. Saint Augustine was a Christian who lived in North Africa in the 4th century. And he commented at some length on this story from John. And he points out, quite simply, that the main difference between water and wine is that water doesn't taste of anything, but wine does. Water is tasteless, wine is tasty. And Augustine says, this is the effect that Jesus has on things. He makes things that are tasteless tasty. Augustine takes the example of reading the Bible. When you read the Bible, say the prophetic books of the Old Testament, just as they are, just as you would read any other book, then, he says, they're tasteless. It's just like water. It's fine, it's perhaps even refreshing and good for you, but tasteless. Whereas when you read the Bible with an understanding that Jesus Christ, the Word of God, is the one present and wanting to speak to you right there and then in that text, then suddenly, Augustine says, and this is a quote from him, what you read not only has a taste, but even inebriates you. What you read not only has a taste, but even inebriates you. Suddenly, the words come to life and have a taste to savor and enjoy. Now, at the wedding at Cana, Jesus turned water, which is something necessary for health, cleanliness, staying alive, but something tasteless. He turned it into wine, something unnecessary, something fabricated by human hands for the sole purpose of tasting good and giving pleasure. And that speaks of the gratuitous kindness of God. So look out for signs of it. Where is a good taste being left in your mouth these days? I'm talking metaphorically, of course, but think about it. Taste is unnecessary. We can't get by without food, but we can get by without taste. Taste is unnecessary. So think of the things in your life, little or big, that needn't be there, but are there, and that you savor, that are sweet and good. And, this is simple. Just look at the stuff that's in front of you. For me, right now, it is probably being able to spend a bit more time than normal with my wife and child. That tastes good. Coffee and biscuits, that literally tastes good. A book I'm reading at the moment on Genesis. It's a little bit nerdy, but, really enjoying it. That tastes good. And calling my dad more often than I usually do. That tastes good as well. Those are some parts of my life that taste good right now. They are signs of God's kindness, I suspect. What are the things that taste good in your life? I want to just give a little caveat to that, just to be clear that I'm not saying that following God is all about things that make you feel pleasure, that give you happy or pleasurable emotions. God's kindness to you doesn't necessarily equal you being happy. One thing that we see repeated through John and the other Gospels is that Jesus' miracles rarely made everyone happy. There are usually people who are either terrified by them or offended by them. And I imagine this is the case at the wedding at Cana too. Some people would have been terrified or offended or confused, and some people were probably too drunk to notice that anything had happened. And in terms of feelings and emotions, many of us these days will be pretty low. Some of us will be struggling even with clinical anxiety or depression. But that's okay. You're not a failed Christian if that's you. There's no pressure from Jesus to feel happy. He is kind to you anyway, and signs of his kindness will be there objectively in your life. It's a bit like how sometimes you can eat a really delicious meal, but you're so distracted or preoccupied or like emotionally you're feeling angry or upset that you don't actually register the taste of what you're eating. You are tasting it, but you don't register that you're tasting it, and it kind of passes you by. And I think that's okay. Sometimes that's just where we are. But I encourage you still to notice the meal that has been prepared for you, even if you're not enjoying the tastes. Notice those things in your life that are good, objectively, that don't need to be there, but are there and are good. Even if you can't taste that the Lord is good, you can step back and see that the Lord is good. You can see God's kindness in more than meeting your needs in the midst of your everyday life. So there's number one. If it tastes good, try following it. It may well be a sign of God's water into wine, tasteless into tasty kindness. It may be Jesus being kind to you. Pray to him about it. Say thank you for those good things and ask how he may be speaking to you and leading you through them. Number two, you may be staring at a sign of God's kindness if it's not on your agenda. As I said before, no one asked Jesus to perform this miracle at Cana. Mary hinted to him, you can take a look at it there, Mary hinted to him that there was a bit of a problem. She said, Jesus, they have no more wine. But she probably didn't have in mind 180 gallons of wine as the solution to that problem. 180 gallons of wine was on no one's agenda. No one wanted that much wine. And most probably, they didn't manage to drink it all. But that's what Jesus gave. His kindness went beyond the hopes and needs and agendas of the people he gave to. Now, I don't want to say that our agendas never align with God's. I just think that, us being sinful human beings, our agendas rarely align with God's. And when they do, they only align imprecisely, imperfectly. Because God's agenda is bigger than ours, kinder than ours. But that's good, because it means that it's easier to spot. And I just want to give you one just quick example from my own life. I usually have a prayer time when I wake up in the morning, and I try to keep this time as an important and hallowed time. I don't like it to be interrupted. But recently, our 8-month-old son has got into the habit of waking up at the same time, or even before I get up to do that prayer. And this was really irksome to me. How am I meant to pray with him squeaking and rolling around? But over the past weeks, I've come to suspect that it may be a sign of God's kindness. God turning my prayer, something as important as water, into something as fun and as wild as wine. So I've chosen to follow that sign, to welcome our 8-month-old into my prayer time, to expect him to be there and embrace his presence, trusting that my prayer will still be, valid prayer, even if it's not quite as focused and austere as it once was. But what's happening to you these days that is pushing you out of your agenda, where things aren't going to plan, but where you're being stretched beyond yourself, perhaps in ways that are from God? Perhaps God is at work there, seeking to be kind towards you in a way that you haven't asked for. Now, finally, number 3, and this is perhaps the most simple one. Just look out for whatever builds your trust in Jesus. These are likely signs of God's kindness that are worth paying attention to and following. In verse 11, it says, "What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples trusted in him." Or believed in him, depends how you translate it. Like the sign at Cana, this might be something miraculous and inexplicable that has happened to you or that you have heard. God is alive, and God is the God of miracles. And we don't understand God's rationale for where and why miracles happen. But you may have experienced miracles in your own life. You may not. And either way, I'd say don't worry too much about it. Just enjoy them when they come along. They are signs of God's kindness, signs of the future of his kingdom breaking in, his new creation that will one day be here. That's what miracles are. They are signs of God's future breaking in. On our Ascension Prayer WhatsApp group, which I encourage you to join if you're not on it, we often hear testimonies of miraculous things happening, miraculous recoveries from sickness, of unbelievable coincidences, all that point towards God and his unnecessary kindness. And they all are there, in a way, from God as gifts to build our trust in him. Also on our WhatsApp Ascension Prayer group, more mundane stuff is shared. People share things that are just going on in their lives, that are no less important. Someone might share a worship song, for example, or a video, or an image, or a prayer through which God is being kind to them, building up their trust in him. And I'm not going to labor the point here. It's as simple as that. If there is anything, whether something miraculous and extraordinary, or whether a song or book or hobby or routine, anything that is causing you to love God more, to trust him more, to pray to him more, then stay with it. Go further down that path. That is a sign on the map of God's kindness to you, showing you that he loves you and wants you, and saying, come a little further along this path. So there we are. In Cana, Jesus was kind. And the same Jesus who was kind in Cana is alive and with us today. So watch out for the signs of his kindness in your life. Watch out for what tastes good. Watch out for the curveballs that come from outside of your agenda. And watch out for where your trust in God is being built up. These are all signs of God's water into wine kindness to you. These are signs that you can choose to follow if you want to follow God's map of your life. And I'm going to let us just take a few moments to do that, to kind of make that conscious decision to step back, survey the map, try and spot a few of these signs that I've been talking about in your life. We're going to listen to a piece of music, which of course you can sing along to now, as loudly or as quietly as you want. And it's about God being good, a good father. One who loves us and wants to be kind to us and is kind to us, whether we like it or not. So as you listen to those words or sing those words, survey the map, see where God's kindness is breaking into your life. And I really encourage you, if you're comfortable with this, to share some of that in the chat. Because part of that third bit, building up trust in God, that's something that where we can be gifts to each other. We can be signs of God's kindness to each other. So if there's something in your life that you think is going to be encouraging to others to hear, or that you just want to share, then please just post it in the chat, and we'll be able to share that with each other and pray about it together.